Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're talking about the Fantastic Four. But before we get into that, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love hearing from you guys. We have a fantastic community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. Now, having said all that, there are games that go as planned, and then there are ones that don't, right? And for sure, this game did not. It was one of those days. So my son helped out a local farmer with some stuff because that guy's getting old and he's in really bad health. Long story short is my son threw out his back, so he was in a bad mood from the beginning, right? He kind of didn't want to play, so on and so forth. My daughter at the last minute needed me to take her somewhere, so then because everybody has these schedule conflicts because of family stuff over the summer, we were playing on Discord. So then everybody's just sitting there waiting on me to get back from running an errand. And that always makes me feel bad, you know? So I go run the errand, and when I come back, my audio is not working for some reason. Even though before it was, now it's not. And so then it's even more time of my son again with the he's in a bad mood because of his back. He's helping me with these audio issues. We finally get it going. And then Discord was doing this thing where it kept ejecting me out of the chat. And so I would be explaining stuff for the game and nobody was hearing it because I kind of like when I'm describing a lot of stuff, I kind of look up as I'm visualizing what the scene looks like or whatever. I just kind of look up a lot when I think. So then I'm not looking at the computer screen to see that I'm not in the chat anymore. And then I get in the chat and I'm like, okay, did you guys hear that? And they were paragraph behind me or whatever, you know? So all this stuff is going on. And then I tell them that today's villain is Terrax the Tamer. He's another one of the Heralds of Galactus. I mentioned in the last video, they have kind of like this elemental theme to them, not every time, but often, you know. And Terrax is associated with like earth or stone or whatever, you know. But I always loved him. I remember when I first got the Marvel superheroes role playing game back in the day and was flipping through the pages of the various characters, I got to him and I loved his look. I just thought he looked awesome. He kind of reminds me of like Darkseid, but bald, and then he's got like a big beard. Um, I've just always loved Terrax, and so I'm telling the guys over Discord, you know, what an awesome villain he is, and he's so underappreciated. And if Marvel did a little more with him, he could really be like a first-rate massive villain, right? This guy could be a problem. He could be like a Darkseid or a Thanos or something if they wanted him to be, you know. And and so like I spend all this time talking him up. And I'm like, okay, you know, without any further ado, let's play. And everybody rolls initiative and um Brad, who's playing with us, he's playing the Human Torch and he gets a higher number than anybody else, so he gets to go first. And so the story is like he spots Terrax when he shows up in Manhattan, and Terrax uses powers on this section of the street that is like asphalt and concrete and stuff like that. And so it falls under this element that he can control. So he rips it up out of the ground, just like this huge, you know, it's as wide as a New York City street is. And it's like if you were looking down on it from the top, it would be like a perfect circle. And so he's standing in the center of it and he rips it up out of the ground. And that's just kind of the villain's, you know, big entrance or whatever. So Human Torch sees him, has fought this guy before, knows he's a problem. yada yada yada. He does the thing where he does the skywriting and he makes the circle in the sky with a 4 in the middle, out of fire. So everybody sees this. And like Sue had been shopping, so she gets there. Um, Reed and Ben and Herbie show up in the Fantastic Car, and it's time for the fight, right? And so Brad gets to go first. So Brad rolls the dice, and he's like, "Oh wow, double tens." And for anybody who doesn't know, in DC Heroes, which we take the stats from the old Marvel Superheroes RPG by TSR, and then we convert them into DC because I just like the DC game mechanics better personally. The AP system is very universal. I could go off on a big tangent about it and I won't, but I really like how the AP system works, right? So the point is, in the DC system, if you roll two 10-sided dice to do practically anything, right? And if you roll double ones, that's a critical failure. So like the worst thing that could happen does happen, right? Anything other than that, though, if you roll the same number twice, whether it's a couple of threes or a couple of fours or a couple of fives, whatever, right? We call that rolling doubles. It's a form of critical success. And specifically, what that means is then you get to roll the dice again. And then you take the sum of your first roll and you add it to the sum of your second roll, right? And as long as you keep rolling doubles, you can just keep going. And on very rare occasions, that happens, right? So that's what happens is Brad rolls the dice and he's like double tens, double nines, double eights, like whatever. Not only is he rolling doubles, he's not rolling like double twos, right? It's always like high up there. And he's like, oh, double whatever, double tens again, double eights again. He's like rolling and rolling and rolling, and then the last thing he rolls is a 10 and an 8. And everybody's kind of like blown away by this. And I'm like, okay, let me look at the table. So I go to the table and it's a knockout. After everything had gone wrong, right? From real world stuff like me running errands to the stuff with the computer itself, like the audio issues or rejecting me from chat or whatever, right? And then on top of all that, I spent all this time talking about how awesome the villain was. Brad just comes along and takes him out in one shot. KO. So for like not very long, but for like a split second, kind of what goes through my head is, well, that really ruins the game. And like everybody is going to be so frustrated from everything else that went wrong for them to take time out of their day for this to be what happens. Like that's kind of sucks. And so I thought, well, maybe we should just start over. And like I never do that. And I thought maybe we should start over, because part of being a game master is having to balance things like what do the rules say on paper, or what is a certain thing with a character or a story that is like official, right? But you have to always kind of keep in mind the player's emotions and stuff like that, right? And so I'm kind of weighing all my stuff, but the other thing I'm thinking then is, you know what though, when we get a bad roll and like a hero dies, like a beloved hero, and I am loath to bring dead characters back. Like we only really did that for the big 40th anniversary game. Um that was like a special exception to the rule, right? Um I thought, you know what? As much as I take characters away from players, right, by enforcing the rules, what a hypocrite I would be if when the players accomplish something amazing, then I took that away for some reason, right? And so I decided to just have it be that way. And luckily for me, instead of it being that they were like mad that they had shown up and it was a short game, everybody had stuff going on that day where they kind of didn't want to be playing on that particular day. We usually, the players are in like a better mood and they're more into it and so on and so forth. And Saturday is kind of like our designated game day, right? And so it's kind of like if it's Saturday, you have a commitment to play the game because you don't want to bail on everybody else. Because just like I said, if people can be frustrated by like, oops, it's a one round game this week. Sorry, everybody. You know what I mean? That can frustrate them, but they can also get frustrated if they're counting on you to be, whatever, like the party healer or something, and you just don't show up because you felt like going to an amusement park or something instead. You know what I mean? They can get mad at you. So then gamers tend to have it's almost like a work ethic in a way where they have that sense of obligation of like I don't want to let people down. I need to show up to the game. So that's kind of what everybody did was like everybody had kind of shown up out of obligation in a way. A lot of people didn't want to be there. Brad wanted to be there, but Brad was excited about his role. You know what I mean? And so, like, for my son who had thrown his back out, like I said, he didn't really want to be sitting at his computer on Discord playing the game. He wanted to just sort of like lay down in his bed and like take a nap and take some Tylenol. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So having the game be short kind of worked out. Um, and then, in my opinion, the best stuff was at the end of it, which is I don't want to say we don't care about it. We care about the whole thing, but you kind of often focus on like the middle of a game, at least for my games. We focus on like the middle of a game session quite often. I hadn't put too much thought into the epilogue. And so I just kind of tell everybody, do we want that to be it? Do we want to, because I have another adventure ready. We could do a second adventure. And like Brad had somebody coming over to look at his roof. And like I said, my son wanted to kind of take some Tylenol and just lay down. And, everybody had stuff going on. So, my favorite part was the epilogue. And all I did was I said, is there anything you guys want to say here at the end? Is there anything you want to establish that your character is doing? That kind of thing. And so first of all, boy, this could be a whole video by itself, but for those who have been following the channel, you know that we have like Ghost Rider fights demons and stuff like that from hell, right? And in the Justice League stuff we do, there's a character named Zoriel, and Zoriel is an angel from heaven, right? So no matter what any me or any of my players or whatever, no matter what we believe in real life, in the game for sure those sorts of things exist, right? I mention that as kind of a disclaimer because a lot of people get kind of upset when I go there. But bear with me. For the 40th anniversary thing, we decided to take a lot of characters who had died, and I said there were villains from hell who came back, and we did this thing with Doctor Doom trying to get his mother out of hell, and he defeated Mephisto, and da da da, and that let these villains out. And then, sort of the counterbalance to that was um, heroes came back from heaven and they fought, and so certain characters that had been dead were back, right? And that was sort of how we decided to celebrate the big 4-0, right? Well, so thus far, all I had kind of said, and I was very loose with my wording. And I mentioned villains from hell and heroes from heaven, and that was kind of it. Um, and so we had this conversation also before the game started when people are like waiting on everybody to show up and so on and so forth. Um, Me and Brad were kind of talking about the Human Torch. And for those that are more familiar with the comic book end of things, Ben Grimm, aka the ever loving blue eyed thing, right? He's the rock guy from the Fantastic Four who's made of orange stone. He feels ugly. And the classic thing, I mean, feels ugly and he feels like nobody could ever possibly love him and so on and so forth. And so he had this love interest named Alicia Masters who was blind and she loved him and he loved her, right? And Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was like a ladies' man and kind of a player, and he could basically get any chick that he wanted. And there's this one comic where he decides the chick he wants is Ben's chick. And so, like, we mentioned that. And so this concept came up. We're like, what if the Human Torch didn't go to heaven? What if when the Human Torch died, what if he went to hell? And I said, that's kind of an interesting idea. That would give us stuff to work with because then, first of all, Johnny's done some really questionable stuff in the comics. And we mentioned there's this podcast called Zach Morris's Trash. I guess it's not a podcast, but whatever. There's this thing on the internet called Zach Morris's Trash. And they go through episodes of Saved by the Bell and they talk about how kind of like evil basically the character of Zach Morris was, and a lot of people just I don't know, never noticed or they looked the other way or whatever, right? But I said, honestly, a lot of that stuff applies to Johnny Storm. And because like there's an episode where Screech has this one girl that he likes, and it's very hard for Screech to get girls. And Zach comes along and decides he wants her, only for like the duration of a single episode or whatever, though. You know what I mean? It's very there's a parallel there with the Alicia Masters thing that I mentioned earlier. So we're like, what if Johnny went to hell? Like, what would you do if, first of all, you found out it existed, right? And second of all, you get a mulligan, right? You end up on Earth again. That it, it raises questions of like, uh, was he already judged and stuff like that, or has that not happened yet? Is it a thing where no matter what he does that's good, is he just like screwed? Because like when he dies, he's for sure going to go to hell no matter how good he is from this point on. Is it that way? Or does he have a second chance? What is it? So on and so forth. And and so mind you, this was a conversation we had out of game. And um we never agreed on anything. We never set, nothing is set in stone. Nothing was actually established. I am firmly of the opinion that if it doesn't happen in game, it's not continuity yet, right? If we have conversations out of game, that can affect the game, or maybe it doesn't, right? Until we actually do it. And so we didn't actually do anything. It was just this conversation we had. But I did notice that when Brad was playing Johnny, somebody mentioned something about um, Johnny getting into trouble. I think maybe it was Brad. I can't remember how he worded it now, but something about Johnny getting into trouble. And so we thought he meant like Johnny was going to go gambling and whatever, right? Typical Johnny Storm stuff. And then Brad was kind of like, no, 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 I mean trouble with Terrax. And the way he played Johnny, even though it was obviously super brief, was kind of like Johnny was sad. I thought that was very interesting. So I don't know if he's going to decide to go in that direction in later games and play Johnny as though, yes, he went to hell and now he's going to like turn over a new leaf or something like that. I don't know. But that was interesting on the Johnny end. And then on the Reed end, my son did something I thought was really interesting with Reed, which is initially he was having like a hard time, like he understood what he wanted to do with Reed's powers. And he was having a hard time kind of like getting a handle on Reed's personality. And so one of the names that got kind of mentioned, here and there was Spock. But we thought that in a lot of ways, Reed would kind of be like Spock, right? And but in this game, my son name dropped Dr. Manhattan as kind of his inspiration for Reed in terms of like the psychology of the character. And I thought that was super interesting because Dr. Manhattan, there's this famous line in Watchmen where he says, or what is it? I think somebody confronts him because he had a girlfriend named Janie Slater. And she has, I think at that point it's that she has cancer. I don't think she's has died yet. But other people that he knew have died. And so this reporter is suggesting that the radiation that Dr. Manhattan puts off is causing cancer, right? And so they're saying something to him about like, I don't know, the living and the dead, or maybe it's they're talking about the potential of a war with Russia, and they're like, doesn't that bother you, or something along those lines. But the point that I'm attempting to arrive at is that Dr. Manhattan responds by saying a living body and a dead one have like the same number of atoms. Structurally speaking, there is no difference. And it freaks everybody out, right? And there's this other moment in the movie where the comedian is in Vietnam, and there's this horrific scene where a woman comes up to him and she's pregnant with the child of the comedian, and she doesn't make it through the scene. I'll leave it at that. And so Dr. Manhattan uh, questions the morality of the comedian, but the comedian says, "You know what, Doc? You could have stopped me. You could have turned that broken bottle into snowflakes, or you could have turned the bullet into, whatever, water or something. I forget what it is." And he's like, "But you didn't. You let it happen." And he's like, "God help us all. You're you're out of touch with humanity, right?" And so I thought all of that was interesting, that that's kind of where my son is taking Reed. And I thought, wow, okay. I could see it. And so and then Sue is wanting for there to be a family dinner. And she's with this guy named Jack that we mentioned in the epilogue of this adventure. And she says, I want everybody to come over to the Baxter building, and I want us to all sit around the same table. Um, and the other guys are into it, but Reed is not. And Reed is just kind of like, social interactions are irrelevant. They're just taking me away from my work. There are things I could be inventing that are more important than people. That was interesting. And the thing of her choosing to invite him was interesting. That originally she said she invited everybody but Reed, and then she said, "Well, but we have kids together, like I should extend an olive branch," kind of a thing. And Reed is just like, "No." And he wasn't saying it like, "I'm mad that you're married to somebody else," right? That wasn't the vibe at all. It really was way more like, I just don't give a crap about people, you know. And then the other thing that we kind of shoehorned into the epilogue of this one was Herbie. That we mentioned then it's like raining outside. And by the way, that big hole in the street, I left that part out. Sue created these invisible, um I don't know how to put it. This machinery stuff. She made a construct, and then it like slowly lowered the piece of the street back into position, so that that was all cool, right? And they have one of these time discs that we've had in the last few adventures, and they put Terrax on that disc and they freeze him in time. They take him back to Four Freedoms Plaza, and Herbie is looking out the window and it's raining. And we mentioned that Herbie wondered where Franklin was. That the last time we saw Franklin, Franklin is the second Galactus now, and he was doing other stuff, but Herbie kind of raised him. And so Herbie's over by the window and he's kind of got like one hand on the window with the rain hitting it. And then with the other hand, he's got this old photograph from when Franklin was a kid in the 70s. And so Herbie is sad. And I really liked that because then that gives him humanity, if you'll kind of like pardon the pun or whatever. But you know what I mean, right? So I thought that was like a really good story beat. So actually, even though the fight was like literally a one-shot knockout, I did like this game. Um, so I hope that you enjoyed hearing about it. For better or worse, I'm just here to kind of tell you what we did this week. This is what we did. So, yeah, we hope you liked it. If you did, we would love it if you chose to support our tiny little channel here, um, by hitting that like button. Make sure that you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe you and not tell you. And leave us a comment. What would you have done in my shoes with the one hit knockout? Would you have kept it? Would you have started the game over? No judgment coming from me. Whatever you say is fine. I'm just always curious to see where other people are at with it. Or maybe let me know if you like Terrax the Tamer. And by the way, we are for sure gonna have more Terrax adventures in the future. There's no way I'm letting this be the end of Terrax, right? No, we will see him again, just not yet. But yeah, that's it for me for this one. Thanks for being here. From everybody associated with the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.